Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler.
Welcome back to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler. I am your host, Matt Sadler. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on 97.7 FM, Godfather Media, Rumble, and YouTube, welcome aboard. Sorry it's been a bit since we've been on the radio here on 97.7 FM. I'm so glad you're back listening. If that's how you're hearing me right now, please keep it tuned to the station as much as you can. 97.7 FM KPFF is where the First Amendment lives. So we're going to focus the show today on a couple of super important issues. There is an imminent threat to our U.S. Constitution and the very essence of what the United States of America truly is: a constitutional republic, a representative republic where mob rule and the tyranny of the majority can be checked and balanced. Trust me, when you hear the next word that I'm saying, it's packaged up a lot of times as virtuous, as a great thing, but I assure you it's something that you do not want. So despite what you see and hear in the media, by tech companies, in the sports world, and from the Hollywood geniuses that think their opinion amounts to a hill of beans, we do not live within a democracy. That would be horrible. But it seems like a lot of our politicians, a lot of our elected leaders, a lot of the talking heads, a lot of the power brokers in our world, in our country, want this to be the case in the United States. What's disturbing about some of the new legislation being proposed is that this is coming not from the outside coming into Nevada and invading us, not from the feds and the federal government usurping our power as Nevadans. It's coming from within. It's coming from a bill known as AGR 6. That stands for Assembly Joint Resolution 6. It's being puttered around, passing in one form and hopefully not passing in its final form through the Senate. That's due to be happening here soon, probably being voted on. If for some reason it gets through, it squeaks through, I really hope the governor will veto it. So if anybody who has a direct wavelength and direct contact with the governor, please, or if the governor's listening, please, if this passes through, this is a major one that you need to veto. This bill, in essence, is a starting bill to change the Nevada Constitution. It's clear in the Nevada Constitution that the Electoral College, which for listeners who might not know exactly what that means, it's the mechanism by which we elect the President of the United States. So traditionally, a state like Nevada has an electoral amount of representatives, votes that can be counted in the presidential election. So whichever candidate gets the most votes within Nevada, it's winner take all within Nevada. All electoral votes would go to that candidate. For perspective on this, Nevada has a total of 6 electoral votes. So when a presidential candidate wins the most votes, the most, I'll say, quote unquote, popular votes within the confines of the state of Nevada, even if it's 51% to 49 or if it's 98% to 2%, that winner will get all 6 electoral votes counted to go toward electing the president. It takes 270 to win. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that Nevada is always on the national radar of states for presidents to visit. It's one of the first primaries. It's one of the first election seasons to kind of kick off the presidential election season. So we're paid attention to. So in one level, if this were to change and we go by this new law, and just so it's clear, it's basically a law that's going to make us join the Popular Vote Act, I think is what it's called. Or excuse me, it's actually the National Popular Vote Compact. Now, from what the text says, there's 15 states that have signed on to this or are trying to get this passed as we speak. This is dangerous, and I'll tell you some reasons behind why it's so dangerous. So, like we said, we live in a constitutional republic. So at the federal level, the founders, the people who drafted our Constitution, separated powers, not only between judicial, legislative, and executive, which would be the president. So those powers are definitely, they balance each other out. But even within the confines of the legislative aspect of our legislative branch of government, so that means like the Congress, which is comprised of two chambers. You've heard of bicameral legislative bodies. That's what we are. We are bicameral legislative bodies. The Senate and the House of Representatives. The theory behind that is that some states are bigger than others, right? So Nevada is going to be much smaller than California. To give you some perspective, California has 55 electoral votes in a presidential election. We have 6. So they have almost 10 times as many votes, 10 times as much clout compared to us when it comes to who the president of the United States is. And that's how it exists right now. So as a consequence of, a proportional amount of folks that comprise each of the different states, you have a different amount of representatives. So California gets a lot more representation in the House of Representatives in our federal Congress body. So we have less. We only have a handful. They have 50 some odd representatives that get elected. So that's one huge difference. But to balance that out so that smaller states aren't completely trampled on, we have a chamber called the U.S. Senate. Now, the U.S. Senate is comprised of 2 senators in each and every state, regardless of size. So whether you're New Hampshire, Nevada, or the big states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, you still only have 2 U.S. senators. So that way, states' rights, the rights of the smaller states, aren't trampled on by the majority power of the larger states. And that's an ingenious insert into our U.S. Constitution. And so that kind of runs parallel to what's happening now, and I'll kind of explain why. So we live in Pahrump in Nye County. We are a small town county, right? So the biggest town is us, Pahrump. We're in the tens of thousands. The greater Las Vegas area, millions of people. I mean, the population differential between Clark County and Nye County is exponential. So we are a small town, but the way our government and elections are set up currently, our voice still counts. In Pahrump, we still see, whether it's Adam Laxalt, some of the national level politicians that are running in our state, whether it's lieutenant governor, the governor, U.S. Senate candidates, U.S. Congress candidates, they pay attention to towns like Pahrump, Tonopah. They're visiting the different counties within the state to earn your vote, which is what they should do. They should earn your vote. They should be accessible in the election process. That's a good thing, to not discount the smaller counties. It's why politicians seeking office campaign in small towns. I mean, if you had attended the Lincoln Day dinner in spring of 2022, right? That place was packed, and there were a lot of candidates there. I mean, you saw our current governor, Joe Lombardo, U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress candidates, state Senate, state assembly, county commission, you name it, people were there. We started doing things where we change our Nevada Constitution to this National Popular Vote Compact. You're going to immediately see a halt. Politicians, and for good reason, if it were to change, they're bound to kind of play by the rules of the system, by the rules of the game. when the rules of the game change, their tactics and strategies will change. And the power that we already see disproportionately wielded by cities like Las Vegas, like Henderson, like North Las Vegas, like Reno, you're going to see the magnitude of those small, relatively small compared to our large state. We're a pretty big state, but our population centers only take up small portions within a couple of counties in our state. And that is where their power is going to be magnified exponentially. And trust me, it will affect your day-to-day lives. Other consequences of a process like this, where, say, the state of Nevada, which is considered still a purple state. Like, I would not be surprised if this next election season, for the presidential election season, if we were flipped red, assuming it's Donald Trump, or even if it were to be, Ron DeSantis heading up that ticket, it would not surprise me if that candidate, whether it's DeSantis or Trump, gets the most popular votes inside the state of Nevada to earn all 6 of those electoral votes and add them to their tally on their quest to get to that magical number of 270. If, however, a situation comes about where we are part of this compact, the national popular vote, it's not unusual nowadays, especially. Look at Hillary Clinton, for instance, had more popular votes throughout the country when you add it all together, had more votes than Donald Trump. But Donald Trump won more states and more electoral votes, which was more indicative and according to what the founders wanted for our country, so that the majority couldn't just rule over the minority. Because let me give you a scenario where you'll see where this makes complete sense. I can think of a scenario, well, it's probably not that possible, but it could happen if enough people came out and voted. We have 2 states, for instance, California, New York. In and of themselves, California has, 55 electoral votes. New York, I think, has 29. So that puts, 84 electoral votes. But then you got to look, how big is the population total between New York and California? What if all the eligible voters, or say 95% of them, all decided to vote for a Democrat candidate, say Kamala Harris or something, for a couple years from now or whatever, or maybe 6 years from now, some horrible candidate, just like I'll use Kamala as the perfect example of a terrible candidate. Say they vote by 95% of all voters in New York and California. They all vote for Kamala. In all the other 48 states, by some miracle, like a Reagan-esque type miracle where the GOP candidate, back then it was Reagan, we'll say DeSantis this time if it's like 6 years out in the future. What if he wins every single state, but by a very small margin, say 50.1 to 49.9 on average? He wins every single state. It won't matter that each and every one of those 48 states voted for a particular candidate if the popular vote totals. So take everybody in San Francisco, everybody in LA, everybody in, New York City, everybody in Stockton, California, or Sacramento, California, decides to go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris. Just those urban areas alone, if they got out the vote in just those areas of those states on the coast, to think that number could push Kamala Harris into the White House, that's frightening. And it's not what our founders wanted for our country. Yet we're seeing states, little by little, chipping away, taking a little bit here, a little bit there. And at the end of the day, you'll see a massive change in not only how, the vote goes unfairly, but the voices of all of you, Perumpians, and some of you, even if you're seeing this, you could be watching this on Rumble in a different city, different town, some small town in Ohio, Anchorage, Alaska, wherever you might be, your voice is going to be so nullified and so muted, and the politicians and the media and the presidential candidates are going to ignore you. Your voice won't matter. Your voice will not have an ability to affect any substantive change. There's not going to be, the media markets, by the way, are going to be decimated in most places. They rely so much on the people that just dump millions of dollars in campaign ads in different areas. It'll be quite likely in Nevada, they won't even bother. In New Hampshire, they won't even bother. The small places, small states, they're not going to get any ad revenue from candidates. They're going to focus on the major metro areas to get out the vote, where they're going to have the best chance to have the most people turn out and vote. They're going to only have to campaign in the large cities. They're going to only have to go campaign and, forget about Lubbock, Texas or something. They're going to just be focused on Houston, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Dallas, the small towns. They're not even going to care. Trump, Nevada, we're not going to see another high-level candidate even care about what we think out here. We're not even going to know who's running unless we're watching, national news or something. That we're not going to get postcards in the mail. We're not going to get invited to meet and greets. None of that stuff's going to happen. And I think that's a travesty, because the way we have it, the old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but our system's not completely broken that we have to throw it away for something like this. Furthermore, an unintended consequence for a place like Nye County, like the county that I live in, Pahrump, the town that I live in Pahrump, is the down ballot effect that, you could say it's an unexpected consequence, but it's totally it is intended as a consequence. It's going to have massive reaction. If one of your main loves in life, say, is Trump, right? Donald Trump. There's a lot of Trump supporters in our town. I would vote for Trump for sure. I think he can get stuff done. He's no saint. He's no perfect person, but he, in my estimation, was perfect for the job last time when he won and served 4 years, and he would be the perfect fit again. I mean, I believe so. But if you felt in your heart of hearts that no matter how hard of a campaign Trump ran, that there was a good possibility that the Democrat candidate would get more popular vote. What if you decide that your vote doesn't matter in Nevada and you're not going to show up and vote for Trump? Well, what else aren't you doing? The answer to that question is you are not expressing a vote or putting out a vote for other strong candidates, other conservative candidates that are down ballot, that are also up for election. So maybe you go there and you don't support a county commissioner that you really like. You don't support a conservative state representative that's trying to either get elected or win re-election. So you don't get a voice in that. You don't get a chance to vote for that person. You don't get a chance to re-elect Lieutenant Governor Stavros Anthony if he's in an election against some crazy Marxist Democrat. Your vote won't be there because you will have sat at home based upon your vote in the presidential election not mattering. And that could very well happen. I think we saw a little bit this last November when we were expecting more victories down ballot, more victories across all spectrums of political races for Republicans, and we didn't really see it happen. That red wave that everybody was talking about obviously did not come to fruition. I mean, it wasn't a complete loss in Nevada. We picked up, a couple important seats, like the governorship, like the lieutenant governor. Lost a little bit of ground in the state legislature, but, was not the victory that we thought it would be. And partly why, my theory, is a lot of people, and I know some people, some smart people, some people I love and care about, that chose not to really turn out and vote because they honestly believe that the system was rigged. And I don't think some of our Republican candidates did a great job. People that lost in the primary, for instance, to go out and kind of echo that all the elections are rigged, that it's not an election, it's a selection, stuff like that. It might have kept people on the sidelines because, let's face it, I believe in our state there's 150,000 registered Republican voters that did not vote in the general election. And there were some huge items, in addition to candidates, that could have been pushed over the top. There were some close races that could have changed. We could have a completely different Secretary of State right now. We could have a completely different U.S. Senator right now. That would totally change the balance of power in Washington, D.C. And instead of having a minority, we could have a majority, in the state, in the U.S. Senate, if Laxalt had performed better with more votes. So that those people staying home really hurt our chances. Another issue that folks might want to learn about is something that Nevadans actually passed, and now it has to pass one more time before it can become a new constitutional change to our system in Nevada. It's called ranked choice voting. So traditionally we have what's called closed primaries, right? So a primary comes before the general. Usually it's in June, for instance, is mostly every time there's a primary. June, each major party will pick its nominee in the form of an election traditionally. So a primary election for the Republican nominees and a primary election for the Democrat nominees. Now both elections are closed, meaning, a Democrat or a non-Republican cannot vote in a Republican primary, and the same thing with a Democrat primary. A non-Democrat cannot vote in a Democrat primary. A Republican can't go in there and vote against a Democrat candidate in a Democrat primary. And I think that's a good thing, because I think the parties deserve to put forward who they want. And what better way to do that than to have an actual election, have them compete, to have a candidate get the most votes so they can see who moves on to square off in the general election. For some reason, in Nevada, we chose in November that by a margin of, it looks like 52.9% to about 47% voted for what's called ranked choice. It was a ballot measure, and if you've heard any of my shows, anytime you see a ballot measure, those are the questions, right? Question 1, question 2, question 3. Your instinct should always be no, until you really research it and are convinced without a shadow of a doubt that the answer should be yes. Almost always the answer is no, no, no. This was definitely one that should have been a no. So that margin was only 58,000 votes. So imagine if those 150,000 Republicans had decided to not stay on the sidelines and got in that election. And even if a good majority voted against that measure, that could have been enough to sway it to where we didn't have ranked choice voting. And what ranked choice voting is, I am assuming everybody understands what that is, but it's when a primary is basically open to all candidates. So there wouldn't be any exclusive Republican primary. You could have, 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, a Libertarian, nonpartisan, Green Party candidate, all in the same primary, and everybody's open to go ahead and vote. And based upon a certain formula where your first place vote gets more clout than your second and third and fourth and fifth, but then the person who has the most votes, actually the top 3, get to move on to the general election. And it sounds on its face that it could be kind of fair until you kind of look at it for more than like 2 seconds and realize that it's not really that fair. Say, for instance, in our community, you can pretty much rely on certain, if there's a general election, the way that our electoral body is made up in the county of Nye, in the town of Pahrump, you can expect a Democrat challenger in a general election against a Republican to maybe pull in like 35% of the vote if they perform well. Well, then that margin could be like a 65 to 35% margin in favor of a Republican. And the Republican usually will move on and win the general election, just based, if nothing else, based on just voter registration numbers. And if people go in there and just vote party line, there's more Republicans than Democrats. So even if you just go by that metric alone, the Republican can sail through. Ranked choice, however, is a little bit different. So if you had a scenario like that where there's multiple Democrats, multiple Republicans, the top 3 vote getters out of the primary get to move on to a general. What if there's 2 relatively strong GOP candidates and 1 recognizable Democrat candidate, and they're the ones that emerge with the most points to move on to the general? And say you got that same number that I was talking about. A good candidate that's well known as a Democrat might pull in 35% of the vote. And say they do that. Say in the general with those 3 candidates, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, the Democrat pulls in 35%. That leaves what, 65%? What if those candidates were so close that they were almost 50-50, and I was myself in a primary election where the numbers were relatively close? I think out of 8,600 total votes in my race, we only came up short about a little over 300. So say those kind of numbers are reflective in this new ranked choice scenario that I'm painting for you. That leaves 32.5%. 32.5% for the other guy or girl. Which number is bigger? The 35% that the Democrat was able to get. Democrat wins the general election in ranked choice in a county where you can almost rely on 65 or 70% Republican votes, and that could happen. I think something similar has happened in Alaska, for instance, where if it's one-on-one, mano-a-mano, Republican versus Democrat, no chance. The Republican's going to take that Democrat out, even if they're what I coined from someone else who coined it from probably someone else, a soft Republican. Can still reasonably expect, to win in Alaska or in rural Nevada. And by rural, I mean pretty much every county that's not Clark and not Washoe. I'm telling you, the ranked choice thing, and all we need to do is vote again in the next election, 2024. If we voted again, it looks like our system changes, and we will be a ranked choice voting state. So you compound that with this national popular vote compact. You magnify that with a Secretary of State and a Democrat-controlled legislature here in Nevada that is just waging war against smaller counties when it comes to how they're going to conduct their elections, trying to just make a permanent mail-in voting system that is vulnerable to possible fraud. You can't say that it's not. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a crazy loon. When you have a system where they're trying to make it illegal for voters to ever show their ID, make it illegal to have any kind of hand count check measures to make sure that voting machines are tabulating the vote totals properly. When you're proposing laws like that and trying to get those passed, why are you doing that unless you're trying to hide something? Unless you're trying to perpetuate or grow voter fraud. Why wouldn't you want more security, more transparency? Well, I think the answer is pretty obvious to any listener that's using that brain between their ears. You know why. They don't want elections to be fair. And it's sad because when we start behaving like these banana republics, that's the beginning of the end. And not only that, but the fate and the weight of goodness and morality in the world, assuming God doesn't intervene, obviously, because God's in control. God could probably step in there and make things happen. But if left to our own devices, if that's the road that we choose, we're sealing our own fate. We're going down a road that we won't be able to come back from. So please mark down this date, commit it to memory, fixate on it, November 5th, 2024. If this current legislative session in 2023 that we're, going to be coming out of and closing up here in June births a bunch of bad laws that the governor either signs into law or tries to veto, and then they override his veto and it becomes law anyway, we're going to only have so many Alamo moments, where we're at our last stand, where we have, our last, line of defense. November 5th, 2024 is one of them, to not vote for ranked choice. Because if either one of these two things that I'm talking about happens, we're in trouble. If both of them happen, we are in dire straits. And I'm telling you, please talk to your neighbors. Obviously, continue doing what you're doing if you're voicing opposition to your elected representatives on Nellis, on the Legislative Interactive website. Keep doing that. When the votes are coming to a close, if there are bills, and we'll touch on more of the bills, we'll probably have a list of every single bad one that is going toward the governor's desk. If you can reach out through our site, thenevadapatriot.com, we're going to have links on there to contact the governor about these bad bills, and please specify them, and please implore him, beg him to veto the ones that are squeaking by, so that we can still salvage this great state that I love and not go down that point of no return. Well, that's going to do it for this week's podcast. I appreciate you staying with us and tuning in. However you tune in, whether it's godfather.media, whether it's the radio at 97.7, or through YouTube or Rumble, or our website, thenevadapatriot.com. Please check us out if you haven't before. Once again, I'm your host, Matt Sadler. I hope that this information is helpful, that maybe you have some arrows in the quiver that you can kind of join in on the fight. I know it's a daunting task. I know everybody has a life, kids, and someone's got soccer practice or recitals, and some of you are homeschool parents, work 2 jobs. It's tough, trust me. It's a balancing act, right? But I think the worst thing that we can do is completely detach from the things that are important, because even though it doesn't seem like it, if like-minded people who want good things to happen can come together, sometimes there's a lot of power in that, and we can make these changes. And sometimes these changes can be pretty large, and they can affect the next generation. So just like bad ideas, bad policies can affect generations, so can effective good changes can affect the generations in a positive light. Because let's face it, on balance, our culture, our society, it is not getting better. So please join me, become a part of the solution. No matter how small of a part that is, please get in the game. Once again, on behalf of the Nevada Patriot Podcast, this is Matt Sadler. Good night, and God bless you.
You've just spent some of the best minutes of your life hanging out with Matt Sadler at the Nevada Patriot Podcast. Thank you for listening. Tell a friend and join us next time. After you catch your breath, check out the NevadaPatriot.com for more content, advertising opportunities, and to give listener feedback. That website again is the NevadaPatriot.com. Until next time, Patriots, stay American.